Good evening. My name is Mary Taylor, and I'm a volunteer with the League of Women Voters, Seattle-King County. And on behalf of the League, I want to extend a warm welcome to our in-person and YouTube audiences, our moderator, Judge Dean Lum, the candidates for King County Prosecutor Jim Farrell and Lisa Mannion, and a filming crew from King County TV. I also want to thank the League volunteers who have come together to make this happen. The League of Women Voters, Seattle-King County, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. We are a volunteer, member-driven grassroots organization. Volunteers put in countless hours, and we rely on contributions to continue our work. Please visit the League of Women Voters Seattle-King County website to join the League or to contribute. Moving into our show, a word about audience questions. And we encourage the audiences, both in person and on YouTube, to participate by submitting questions to the candidates. And we will begin posing audience questions a little before 8, but please start submitting them right away. And how to do that. People here in the theater should use the index cards, which are going to be provided by Jennifer there, and write out your question. And you can raise your hand or just raise your hand and we can pick them up. If you're joining us on our YouTube channel, you can use the comments section of the video to ask questions. Keep in mind, you need to be a subscriber to our channel for 1 minute before commenting, so make sure you're logged in to your YouTube account and hit the red subscribe button to join the conversation. Keep in mind, we may rewrite your questions for clarity or combine questions in the same topic. Chances are we won't get to all of them. Lastly, on the housekeeping side, the restrooms are located right as you come in. The women's is over here and the men's there. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the event, Judge Dean Lum. And Judge Lum served for 23 years on the King County Superior Court trial bench, presiding over a wide variety of criminal and civil cases, as well as civil cases. He has held numerous state, local, and national judicial bar association and civic leadership positions. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The two candidates running for King County Prosecutor are Lisa Mannion, currently Chief of Staff to Dan Soderberg, their current prosecutor, and Jim Farrell, currently the Mayor of Federal Way. Hereafter, they will be referred to as candidates, so Candidate Mannion and Candidate Farrell. A little bit about the office that each of these individuals are running for. The Office of the King County Prosecutor is indeed a department of the county government. The office is the second largest public law firm in the state of Washington. The adopted biennial operating budget for 2021-2022 is approximately $170 million, and there's a staff of just under 500 employees, including attorneys, paralegals, and other administrative personnel. The Office of the Prosecuting Attorney includes criminal, civil, family support, and juvenile divisions, and the Victim and Community Services section. Now, a little bit about our rules tonight, as well as a format. Our rules. Questions will be answered one candidate at a time, with one candidate going first, then the other, in alternating order for each question. No interrupting. But candidates are allowed one challenge card, and each of you have your challenge card, to take issue with something another candidate stated in their response to be used at the conclusion of any question. The challenging candidate may have 1 minute to challenge, and the challenge candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Personal attacks, of course, are not allowed. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, I believe Mary Taylor had just mentioned the question and answer format that we're going to be using. Please feel free to take photographs, but still photography only, no recordings, and please hold any applause until the end of the event. Let's talk a little bit more about the format. Each candidate will provide a 2-minute opening statement, followed by timed pre-written questions. That after we finish that process, the audience will have an opportunity to pose questions. Ms. Taylor mentioned the process. And then after that, we're going to have 2 30-second closing statements by each of the candidates. I will let you know how much time you have to respond after asking each question, but typically the response time will be 1 minute. Our timekeeper here will provide 2 signals. The first is when there are 10 seconds remaining, and the other when time has run out. I will start with candidate Farrell, since your surname appears first in the alphabet. I will then rotate which candidate answers then. So first, we're going to turn to opening statements. Candidate Farrell, will you please take 2 minutes to provide us with your opening statement?
Thank you, Your Honor. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Lisa. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event, and especially at this great location. You know, I started my legal career just 1 block over at the city of Renton, where I served as a prosecutor from 1995 until 1998. I joined the King County Prosecutor's Office and was there for 16 years until I became mayor of Federal Way just about 8.5 years ago. When I was serving at the King County Prosecutor's Office, I probably had hundreds of jury trials, handled thousands of cases. I earned the distinction of being a senior deputy prosecutor. I was the president of the union, and it was a truly rewarding experience. I'm now the mayor of Federal Way, where I lead a city of 100,000 people, $100 million budget, and 150 budgeted officers. I'm running because I think that my unique experience, both as a mayor and as a prosecutor, both as a senior deputy and as a city prosecutor, I think makes me uniquely qualified. I'm also very concerned, as are many of the dozens of the mayors and elected officials that have endorsed me, concerned about the spike in crime and the manner in which those cases are being handled. Additionally, I'm very concerned about the backlog of 5,000 cases currently in the office that include 230 homicide cases and over 500 sexual assault cases. I'm proud to be endorsed by, as I said, numerous elected officials that represent really a bipartisan, in this nonpartisan race, really I'm honored to have all of their endorsements, which include Congressman Adam Smith, Representative Amy Wallen, the mayors of Auburn, Kent, Renton, Tukwila, dozens more, and too many to name right now. But I'm also very honored to have the endorsement of many labor unions and the 47th District Democrats, and a lot of friends, and I would encourage you to go to my website at jimfarrell.org, lays out my priorities and my experience, and once again, I'm honored to be here, and thank you very much.
Candidate Mannion, will you please take 2 minutes to provide your opening statement?
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and everyone in the room. Public safety is my top priority. I want everyone to feel safe where they work, live, and play. I have dedicated 27 years of my career to public service and to public safety. For me, it's about ensuring that our communities stay safe and supported. It's about identifying common ground and building strong coalitions. It's about working in collaboration to get results. As the Chief of Staff, here are some recent examples of how I have advocated for and delivered for public safety. I have partnered with our community to build effective diversion programs that have reduced juvenile crime to an all-time low. I have secured funding for a new hate crimes unit. I have secured resources to track and combat gun violence. I have partnered with business leaders and with the Seattle City Attorney's Office to address organized retail theft and commercial crime. I have added 10 new victim advocate positions to enhance victim services. I formed a public integrity unit to review officer-involved use of force cases and police shooting cases after the passage of I-940. And we still have important work to do. As your next prosecuting attorney, I will continue to lead on these critical issues, and I will build a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety. And I am ready to hit the ground running. I am ready to reimagine our Involuntary Treatment Act court to ensure that it is the important safety net that it can and should be. one that offers services before people decompensate and commit crimes. I'm ready to tackle gun violence. We know the individuals that are close to gun violence, and we can and must partner with law enforcement to intervene before they become victims or perpetrators of violence. I am ready to invite our BIPOC and business communities to the table to craft solutions. We need their good ideas, we need their trust, and we need their participation. With your help, I will be the first woman and the first person of color to hold this seat, and I will bring 27 years of proven leadership to this office. Thank you.
I will now ask you some questions prepared in advance by the League of Women Voters, Seattle-King County. There are 12 questions, and you will each have 1 minute to respond to each question. We're estimating that the audience questions will begin about 7:55 or so, but let's turn then first to the written questions from the League of Women Voters, Seattle-King County. Candidate Mannion, I'll start with you. This question is submitted by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. What policies would you put in place to ensure fair and unbiased use of prosecutorial discretion for Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members? You have 1 minute.
We have to acknowledge that there are racial disparities in our criminal legal system, and we have to take action to dismantle these disparities. They will not disappear on their own. Here are some direct actions that I have taken to address the disparities in our criminal justice system. I have started our office's Equity Social Justice Committee. I mandated mandatory training on implicit bias to improve the fair and impartial decision-making by our attorneys and our staff. I have implemented mandatory cultural competency training to ensure that we have the tools to talk about race and we understand how race intersects with our criminal legal system. I understand that not everyone trusts our system and not everyone feels that our system is fair. And we can invite the participation of our BIPOC communities. We can share our data and we can examine the data to dismantle the racial disparities that are in our system. And unless we think system actors are acting intentionally, the data alone shows that there is implicit bias and inherent racism built into our system.
All right, Candidate Farrell, you have 1 minute to respond to that question.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, I think it's true accountability. I think is very important. It's important to judge each case individually and making sure that we've got our best possible evidence and accountability for misconduct that does occur. That's why at the City of Federal Way, I supported the implementation and the rollout of body-worn cameras. I made a policy that any officer that ended up on the Brady list, which is a list of instances of instances of dishonesty, that we would not keep employed an officer that ended up on the Brady list. And as a King County prosecutor, we certainly would never build any cases with officers that were found to be on the Brady list. And I think it's critically important that we have true accountability when there is misconduct and conduct trainings and outreach to ensure that systemic racism does not continue and has no place whatsoever in our cases. And that has to be an intentional plan and outreach and communication, but certainly we need to make sure that we weed out officers that engage in any kind of misconduct.
All right. Thank you. We're going to alternate then who answers the question first. So Candidate Farrell, you'll respond to this question first. You both have received a significant number of endorsements from individuals and organizations. Which 3 endorsements do you believe are the most important to you personally and to your campaign? You have 1 minute.
Well, that's really hard. I'm truly honored to have the endorsement of all those elected officials. I'm really honored to have the endorsement of Congressman Adam Smith. The labor unions, I can't just pick one, but I will say the numerous labor organizations, and also the endorsements of the police guilds who have entrusted me with their endorsements, and I'm endorsed by the police guilds of Seattle, King County, Bellevue, Kent, Des Moines, Federal Way, and I'm honored to have their endorsements.
Candidate Mannion, 1 minute.
Thank you. Of all of the 160 plus endorsements that I've received, the endorsements that are most meaningful to me are the individual King County legislative districts. There are 16 in King County, and so far I have earned the endorsements of 15. I'm just waiting to hear from the 32nd. It is rare for a candidate to get the full slate of all legislative districts in King County. And we know that values are important to our voters, and these endorsements mean to me that they understand that I am a strong Democrat in good standing with our Democratic Party, and that I share their Democratic values. And if pressed, I have to say I am so honored to have the endorsement of strong API leaders like Governor Gary Locke, Mayor Bruce Harrell, Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, Senators Joe Nguyen, Mona Das, Manka Dhingra, and our representatives Tana Sen, Cindy Ryu, Davina Dore. I'm so honored to have all of their support.
All right. Candidate Mannion, the next question. What are the top 3 things you hope to achieve in your first year as county prosecutor from a policy standpoint, and how will you achieve them?
Well, the first thing I would like to do is hold a public safety summit. I would like to ensure that all of our police and all of our leaders and all of our jurisdictions are working together. We know that we don't have enough police resources, so let's make sure that we are working on the same thing and that we're sharing the same values. I also want to set in motion the reimagining of our mental health system, and I would like to lean on all of the state representatives and senators who've endorsed me to change our Involuntary Treatment Act court so that it's a more collaborative court that ensures that people get help before they decompensate and before they commit crimes. The benefit of making that a therapeutic court is that we can also tap our mental illness drug dependency dollars to pay for it, because we know that our state funding is not enough. Another thing that I would like to do is tackle gun violence. We know how to identify the individuals that are close to gun violence, and we can work together with police and with law enforcement to intervene before they become victims and perpetrators of violence.
Candidate Farrell.
Well, thank you very much. I think the most pressing matter to take up very first of all is the crisis in regard to that 5,000 case backlog. A new unit will need to be created that will triage those cases. There are 230 people charged with murder, and they're not being, or not charged, but they've been referred for charges, and that hasn't occurred. And 500 sexual assault cases. That's a crisis, and that needs to be addressed immediately. There's also a crisis where we've got certain restrictive laws that were passed in a rush about a year and a half ago with regard to police pursuits, with regard to drugs, that need to be addressed in Olympia to make sure that our officers can pursue and that we are able to do the kinds of things that are necessary. We also want to launch a conviction integrity unit. I do think it's critically important to reset the environment with regard to retail theft, and the filing and disposition standards need to be re-examined to meet community standards and expectations of the communities we serve. Thank you.
Candidate Mannion, I believe you had raised the challenge, so you have 1 minute on comments, and then Candidate Farrell, you have 1 minute after that.
I want to correct some mischaracterizations that my opponent has made. We currently have a backlog of 4,686 cases that have been charged and are awaiting trial. I will never lie about those numbers or the circumstances of our backlog. The reason we have a backlog is because our deputies have been in the courthouse every day of the pandemic, filing 20 to 30 felony cases each day. We never went home. We never turned a blind eye to crime. What did happen is that our state Supreme Court put a halt on jury trials, and as a result, we had a system that was accustomed to resolving 300 jury trials a year trickle down to 12 in 1 year, and we are still not up to full capacity. That is why we have a backlog. Those cases have been charged. We do not have a backlog on unfiled homicide or gun crime cases, and we also already have a conviction integrity unit and have examined our FADs to meet community values. We've already done that work.
Candidate Farrell.
Well, to my understanding, the deputies are still not back to the office. They are working remotely still, and there are 230 pending homicide cases with the 500 sexual assault cases, and no plan to push them through. There's no sense of urgency to be able to get those through the system, and those victims and the families of those victims deserve justice.
Next question to Candidate Farrell first. In March 2022, the Seattle City Attorney's Office and the King County Prosecutor implemented the High Utilizer Initiative. The initiative identified 118 individuals responsible for 2,400 misdemeanor criminal cases, such as theft, trespass, assault, and weapons violation in Seattle over the past 5 years. The goal of the initiative is to dramatically decrease the group's public safety impacts through different approaches, including incarceration and better access to services. King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg was quoted as saying, quote, "We know that the community wants immediate action that holds prolific offenders accountable," close quote. He further noted that the challenge for our community is finding resources that address the root causes of the behavior. What do you think of this approach? What elements are critical to its success? 1 minute.
Well, I think that approach is spot on. There are a very small number of people who commit most of the offenses. And, you know, that's actually something that was done previously under the prior leadership of the legendary prosecutor Norm Mailing with regard to the car theft initiative, where it focused on a very small number of individuals who were committing most of those crimes, and the numbers dropped. They did it again with the repeat burglar initiative. And I think that same approach needs to be adopted with regard to the violent individuals that are committing the gun crime. And that's something that I've advocated for, bringing the South King County and East King County mayors together. Unfortunately, we haven't got that level of cooperation from the prosecutor's office, and it's one of the reasons I'm running. But I think that's the approach to do, to make sure that we target into the individuals that are what I refer to as the high-impact offenders. And I think that's exactly the way to proceed.
Candidate Mannion.
The prosecuting attorney's office has long had a high-impact offender program and focus, and I've been part of that. When we have our new city attorney and our new mayor take office, I immediately reached across the street to strike a partnership that wasn't there before. And right away, we were trading information, combating organized retail theft and property crime, identifying the individuals who were cycling in and out of our jail. Together, we went to Executive Constantine and got him to lift the jail booking restrictions on misdemeanants to hold individuals accountable. I was at the Downtown Seattle Association's annual meeting 2 weeks ago, and we know that this is working because they have reported that since January of this year, property crime in downtown Seattle and the surrounding core has decreased by 20%, and violent crime has decreased by 30%. That doesn't mean that we're done, but we know that these partnerships are working, and it's long what I've been doing, partnering with others to build strong coalitions to keep our communities safe, and I will keep doing that.
Candidate Mannion, next question. This question was submitted by someone who is currently incarcerated in Washington State. Periodically, the state legislature creates new avenues for early release to address prison overcrowding or in response to shifting perspectives on criminal rehabilitation and the effectiveness of incarceration. What role would you play in determining who should be considered for resentencing? 1 minute.
One of the things I did as chief of staff was I led our office's first review of our early 3 strikes cases, where every single strike was a robbery too, which since state law has been amended and that is no longer a strike offense. This was a series of crimes that disproportionately impacted African American men. That work led to the updating of our state laws. It led to 6164 and it led to 5164 that served to remove robbery 2 as a strike offense and also codified the prosecuting attorney's office's discretion to review sentences to ensure that there can be justice that reflects our modern community's values. This is the type of work that serves to reduce the racial disparities that are in our criminal legal system, and it is the type of work that our communities are asking for us to do. And it is the type of work that I'm committed to continuing to lead in partnership with our community and our criminal justice stakeholders.
Candidate Farrell.
Could you please read the question again?
Yes. Periodically, the state legislature creates new avenues for early release to address prison overcrowding or in response to shifting perspectives on criminal rehabilitation and the effectiveness of incarceration. What role would you play in determining who should be considered for resentencing?
Well, I think that's really what we're going to be doing with the Conviction Integrity Unit, really making sure that there were certain cases, and I actually handled and tried 3 strikes cases, homicide cases. So like I said, I've handled hundreds of jury trials. And there were times in which, you know, especially with some of the 3 strikes cases, that's actually where I got the, you know, where I really think it's important for us to follow up, because there were times in which I thought perhaps the punishment was disproportionate to the crime, and I think we always need to be looking at that. I think we need to have some intentionality to ensure that justice is served. But where the crimes are egregious and the law is clear, I think that's some of those need to stand. But we always need to be willing to do the right thing.
Next question, Candidate Farrell. To what extent are approaches such as restorative justice, drug courts, mental health courts, and similar practices appropriate in resolving felony criminal matters in King County under certain circumstances? 1 minute.
Oh, I think they're imperative, and I think you certainly want to make sure that we have pathways to get, especially young people or people that have taken a wrong turn, get them back on the right track. But these restorative practices must have transparency and accountability, and accountability is a key point. When RCP, the Restorative Community Pathways, was launched, it was launched without any sort of judicial oversight, no check back, very concerning, and zero notice to the cities that they serve. And so I think it has to be done where you've got to have a check back in, you've got to have some transparency, and you've got to have a level of accountability and check back that is just currently not there.
Candidate Mannion.
You know, I have seen the power of working with community to build proven and effective diversion programs. That is why juvenile crime, including police referrals, are at an all-time low. When you go upstream and address root causes, you have a return on investment and a lasting impact. With regard to restorative community pathways, there is accountability, and the accountability is with our community. And when we say that there is no accountability in community, we're essentially saying that we don't trust our community. We know that our courts are clogged. You just heard my opponent complain about that, yet he wants to take young people who have had a fist fight on a schoolyard and haul them before the judges. We have better uses for our courts. We know that young people who have supports, young people who are given opportunity, people who are offered treatment and services, they change their lives and turn their lives around. And that's the type of public safety that can go hand in hand with holding violent offenders accountable.
Candidate Farrell, I believe, raised the challenge card.
Thank you very much. RCP was launched, again, with zero notice to any of the cities in King County, but it had also included and made eligible offenses of bringing a gun to school, unlawful possession of a firearm in the second degree, residential burglary, commercial burglary, felony harassment, car theft, dozens more. It was deeply troubling. And these cases, clearly we want to make sure that people get back on track. They have got to appear before a judge. They've got to get a case number, and we need to make sure that they actually showed up and did what they were asked and required to do. And so the idea and the goal is to get them back on track, but just not turn our backs and watch the cases go out the back door.
Candidate Mannion.
Is this the same question regarding RCP? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
RCP was actually very much launched with notice to our communities. Dan Satterberg, Dow Constantine met with our South County mayors. We met with community. We invited the chief of our criminal division to county council, our city council meetings to address RCP. And some of the juvenile crimes have really scary names. When you talk about robbery in the second degree, in the juvenile world, that is one young person pushing down another young person and taking a phone or a backpack. And taking a gun to school in our state law is unlawful possession of a firearm. And what my opponent hasn't shared with you is that under our state guidelines, it takes 5 convictions before a young person is sent to juvenile rehabilitation. Until then, it's only local sanctions, and it takes months to get those cases to trial. RCP is immediate service, it's more service, and it also helps the harmed party.
Our next question, Candidate Mannion. What should the consequences be if a person accused of a felony crime agrees to enter treatment rather than incarceration and then fails to comply with the terms of the program? And what would you do to help ensure that there are adequate resources available for treatment?
You know, I have a perfect example of this. So there's an individual who over the course of 28 days committed 22 separate thefts of alcohol from the downtown Target. And that person, it took a while for police to get that case to us. It took a while for city attorney's office to get that case to us. And we filed as a felony in drug court. In the meantime, that person had connected with LEAD and connected with services. And I still upheld the decision to file it into drug court because there is designated case management, treatment, and housing that goes with drug court. So while that person is engaged in services and on the upswing, let's add additional support. That is accountability that gets to root causes. And if that person is not successful in drug court, we know that that person will go to prison if they are not successful. That is also accountability.
Well, I spent 16 years in the criminal division of the King County Prosecutor's Office handling these types of cases. And I can tell you that when I first decided to run for prosecutor, I wanted to make sure that the first line in my website said, "I believe in second chances." But I also added, "I don't believe in revolving doors." And that is really why the people of this community, this region, are alarmed and concerned at the revolving door nature of what is going on. You have to have consequences. You've got to have accountability. And when people are continuously committing the same crimes over and over, they're doing themselves and the community, and we're doing as a system, not doing them a service by not holding them accountable. So there have to be consequences. And I actually appeared in hundreds of, at a minimum, hundreds of probation modification hearings, and there has to be some sanctions. So people at some point, if they don't face the consequences of their actions will escalate. And that's, one need only look at San Francisco and Los Angeles for communities in which this has just absolutely got out of control.
Our next question, Candidate Farrell. What can the prosecutor do to help restore trust in the criminal justice system?
Well, I think, the most important thing, I think, is to hold officers accountable for misconduct, not build cases that would rely on officers that have proven history of misconduct, make sure that they are, that the law enforcement agencies have good and reliable internal review processes, and make sure that, one of the things I used to always say when I tried cases was, if something is good for your case, make sure the defense gets it. If something is bad for your case, run it to the defense. And I think it's just a culture, and it's making sure that we earn that trust day after day, case after case.
Candidate Mannion.
I'm committed to building a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety. And that means we are open with our data, and we share our work, and we share our decision making. Without transparency, it doesn't matter how fair the system is. You will not perceive it to be fair. We also have to earn our community's trust by agreeing that we have shared standards of behavior. And when people break those standards, that they will be held accountable. That people who commit endless and repeat offenses cannot be allowed to cycle in and out of our jails. We also have to acknowledge that we have inherent disparities in our criminal justice system, and we have to work with community and our BIPOC communities to dismantle those. We also have to partner with law enforcement so that they know what our filing standards are. I want more of my prosecutors to be at roll calls, to identify themselves as single points of contact, to answer police questions, and I will personally partner with police and community to build this justice system together.
Our next question, Candidate Mannion. Some prosecutors and other law enforcement officials, chiefs of police, sheriffs, etc., have publicly stated they will not enforce or prosecute criminal statutes with which they disagree. These statutes have ranged from required firearm safety storage requirements to involvement even tangentially in abortion. Is this, in your judgment, acceptable, or should prosecutors who are unwilling to enforce statutes remove themselves or be removed from their public office?
I think that when police take a hard stand that they are not going to enforce certain laws, I think that that is the type of thing that breaks trust. Now, prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion in a way that police do not. And I think that we must partner together to uphold the values of our community and to ensure that we are protecting both public safety and that we are also offering second chances to nonviolent youth who make stupid mistakes and stupid choices. They should not be plagued with their poor decision making for the rest of their lives. I also think that we can ensure that police are held accountable when they engage in dishonest policing, when they abuse their discretion. We want them off the force, and police want that too. I support good, strong policing, and I have no problem calling out police who are biased and who engage in untruthful behavior.
Candidate Farrell.
Yeah, I do think that the prosecutors are vested with broad discretion to be able to look at cases and always pursue those cases that they think are in the best interest of justice, and really taking a look at all of the circumstances. When you were reading the question, I immediately thought, Your Honor, about issues with respect to protecting women's right to reproductive choice and their right to choose. And I certainly saw that our current prosecutor had committed that he would not engage in prosecutions for individuals seeking that right. And I agree with that decision, and if I were the King County prosecutor, I would do the same thing. I think the key thing is always it's critically important to do the right thing, to pursue justice, and sometimes the most important thing is an act of discretion that involves non-prosecution.
Next question, Candidate Farrell. In her paper, The Power and Discretion of the American Prosecutor, Angela Davis, a distinguished professor of law at American University and an expert on criminal law and procedure, states in regard to prosecutorial decision-making, quote, "The most important prosecutorial decisions are made behind closed doors, away from public scrutiny, and thus immune from public accountability," close quote. What specific actions will you take to remain transparent and accountable to your constituents?
Well, I was in the filing unit for several years, both in mainstream, in the domestic violence cases. Actually, I started as a deputy prosecutor in the district court unit filing cases. I do think that there's a process in which prosecutors need to review all of the evidence. But when they decline a case, we used to always write a decline memo to the detective, and we would call the victim. And I think when the instances rise to the level of a decision not to file, certainly those can be shared. But the basis on which evidence, on which the cases are filed, are clearly set forth in the certifications for determination of probable cause, and there's a very public, transparent process. So I think that there is a great degree of transparency already.
Get it, man.
I would agree that there is a great deal of transparency in the prosecuting attorney's office, and I'm very proud of that, but we still have work to do. I am proud that we have conservative filing and disposition standards, and I would publish those widely, and I would want our community to know about them. I would also share all of our data openly, not only on our website, but I would convene public forums so that we can go through the data together. I would invite the community not only to ask questions, but also to have a seat at our decision-making process. I know that not everyone is going to agree with all of my decisions, but I will always be transparent, and people will always understand why I made the decision I did, whether they agree with it or not. That type of transparency is what builds trust in our community, it's what builds trust with law enforcement, and it's what builds trust with victims, and we can do better.
All right, our next question. Candidate Mann. King County is striving toward elimination of juvenile detention through the Zero Youth Detention Initiative. In early July 2022, there were 35 youth in detention on serious offenses. What do you see as the next steps in reconciling the policy of achieving zero youth detention with the reality of the number of youth charged with serious offenses?
Well, first and foremost, I will say that it is not okay to have violent young people who commit serious violent crime or sexual assaults released to the community. Those individuals need to be held in an environment that is both secure and therapeutic. While I appreciate and respect the aspirational goal of zero youth detention, the reality is that right now we have a minority number of young people who commit serious violent crime, who commit sexual assaults, and who are deserving of therapeutic services. As a mother and as the mother of 2 teenagers, if my children were to get in trouble and to be held in detention, this is what I would want. I would want them to be received safely. I would want everyone in the facility to know that they are children and that they belong to someone. And I would want those young people treated with respect and offered services upon entry so that they can begin the journey to rehabilitation. We can work together to give young people tools in rehabilitation and also protect public safety.
Thank you. Zero youth detention is not tethered to reality, and it's a very concerning development. The #1 priority of government is to protect the public. And we just need, we need a prosecutor that will stand up and say, this is not the right thing to do. I can tell you there's a great deal of alarm in the ranks of King County Juvenile Probation. Not only have they been completely cut out of the RCP program and any kind of input in that, but in regard to the direction that this is going, it's just really, it's very concerning. And I think we just recently heard that the King County Jail had to close for 8 hours a weekend or two ago. I think it was last weekend, because they were down enough officers. That's just a complete failure of the system and the administration. And they're 100 officers down, severely understaffed. And you need to make sure that we have systems in place to protect the public and to make sure that people, if they commit a violent, or when they commit a violent offense, that there is an appropriate response to hold individuals.
All right, we're going to our 12th question, Candidate Farrell. This question is also submitted by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. How often do you believe incarceration should be used as a tool for violations of the law, and what guidance around incarceration will you provide to the criminal legal system?
Well, every case, the thousands upon thousands of cases that I handled over the course of 19 years, every case is inherently different. It depends on where you find the individual. Are they at the very beginning of is this a first mistake or a second mistake, or have they had a long criminal career? I think one of the things I would do with the cases that I had over all those years, I would ask myself, what is the prosecutorial goal here? How do we get the person course corrected? If they pulled the trigger, killed somebody, kidnapped somebody, then I think, obviously you need to make sure that they get the punishment that is necessary. But I don't think it's a matter of arbitrarily or saying it's, the accountability and the response needs to match the conduct and the history, and those are the factors that matter. And frankly, that's what's called for in the Sentencing Reform Act, the SRA. But I think we also need to make sure that when somebody commits a serious crime, that that we get justice for the victim and that someone's held accountable.
Candidate Madden.
I believe incarceration is appropriate for individuals who commit serious violent crime, sexual assault, and gun crime. I also believe that we can build a parole system or a second look system in Washington State that ensures that we still reflect justice and that we recognize that people can be rehabilitated. That is why it's so essential that we have both a conviction integrity unit and a sentence review unit that looks at past cases to ensure that justice was achieved and to determine whether someone has met the goals of rehabilitation and is deserving of a second look. Because we don't have parole in our state, the work of the prosecutor is essential in committing this function and ensuring that justice reflects the values of our community while also holding people accountable for violent crime.
Okay. We're now at the point where we're going to have some audience questions, and it looks like we do have some audience questions, and Ms. Taylor will be handing them up to me. Okay, and thank you so much. Here's the first question, and this will go to, I believe, first question is to Candidate Mannion, and then Candidate Farrell, you'll also have an opportunity to respond. Lack of prosecutory action has resulted in police officers feeling it's useless to make arrests in many situations. How will you turn that around?
Well, actually, the first thing I would do is I would correct the mischaracterization that the prosecuting attorney's office doesn't file crime. We have felony and juvenile jurisdiction in all parts of King County. We do not have misdemeanor jurisdiction in any of our cities. And we have been in the courthouse every single day filing serious felony crimes. We have not stopped that work, and police need to know it. I do think that in the summer of 2020, at the height of the pandemic, after the murder of George Floyd, policing in America changed. We had a lot of police officers leave the force, we had a lot of officers retire, and we know that we don't have enough police resources right now. And I believe that police officers are feeling frustrated, and they're feeling confused, and they're definitely confused by what's going on with drug possession in our state. The Blake decision made drug possession unconstitutional. Our legislature made it a crime again, but also you have to offer 2 offers of diversion, but there's no database to track that. No wonder police are feeling overwhelmed.
Right, And where was the King County prosecutor in Olympia talking about when Washington State became the outlier and the only state in the country that has the current pursuit law? Where was the King County prosecutor when they essentially decriminalized drugs and from a mayoral standpoint, where our officers are told you have to have 2 prior warnings before you can make an arrest? It's de facto criminalization, decriminalization, which has actually fueled violence on the streets of our communities. So I think that that's where we need that leadership, and what we really need to do is make sure that we unwind the significant confusion regard to what officers are allowed to do and what they can do under the pursuit laws. But we need to get down there and fix them.
Next question from the audience. We'll start with candidate Farrell. And is adding police in King County, unincorporated areas, a priority?
Well, I think so. I think the staffing levels. We saw some statistics that have been in recent regional media, where we're really at very low point. The Seattle Police Department is I think they're probably several hundred officers down. King County Sheriff's Office, there's several hundred officers down. That really compromises public safety, and we need to make sure that officers have the ability to respond when necessary. It's really, when people pick up the phone for 911, we need people there promptly to address that. So yeah, it's a serious, in the city of Federal Way, we've added officers. We've added, we're up to a historic high, and just last year we added 13 officers after we added several more. So it's a major priority.
I absolutely agree that we need more police resources. Policing to me is a common ground issue. When people are afraid and call 911, they want a response. And if it's from a police officer or a social worker, let dispatch decide that. But we need we need police to respond to crime, to investigate crime, and to have a presence in our community. We in the prosecuting attorney's office cannot file charges without a signed certification of determination of probable cause that is signed by a police officer. I absolutely support the addition of good police officers to all of our forces in all of our communities in King County.
All right, next audience question, we'll start with candidate Mannion. Candidate Mannion, you spoke about building partnerships and coalitions within the community. Can you each tell us about some of the partnerships you have with organizations and the role they play in the prosecutor's office?
I am proud to serve on the boards of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and I am proud to carry their endorsement. I also serve on the board of the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, and I have long been in the community crafting solutions alongside of them. I meant what I said about inviting the participation of our BIPOC and marginalized communities. The values of the prosecuting attorney's office must reflect the communities that we serve. And I would ensure that they have a seat at the table so that their voices are heard, so that their voices are listened to, so that they can help shape justice in our community. I am proud of those partnerships, and I would lean on all of my community contacts and all of my community involvement and all of my years of building robust coalitions to problem solve together. I would invite those folks to the table, and we would create change and change the disparities in our criminal legal system and protect public safety while doing it.
Thank you. I currently serve on the Sound Cities Association board. Their motto is 38 cities, 1 million people, 1 voice, and certainly I think I've got great relationships with those folks. I also serve on the Valley Communications of the 911 for Valley as well. I've got the endorsements of the law enforcement agencies that we discussed before, and I've been working with law enforcement for the past, not just the 19 years I was a prosecutor, but for the past 8.5 years I've been mayor. And I'm also a member of the Puget Sound Regional Council. So I've got, as you can go to my website and see, really a vast network of connections and people that I work with, that I trust, and they trust me.
Our next audience question, we'll start with candidate Farrell. What are your thoughts about Dan Sederberg's announcement that his office will no longer wait until inquest verdicts are issued to make determinations regarding filing cases in police-involved shootings?
Well, you know what? I actually, a prosecutor should always do what they believe to do is the right thing. And if the prosecutor has evidence that they believe is actionable at that time, they should do exactly that. I mean, I think as long as they have access to all of the important and necessary information, Sometimes with the inquest information, there's a process to make sure that you're getting all the information. You do want to make sure that if there is a potentially exculpatory evidence that you have access to it. You certainly don't want to file charges if you don't have the full story. So, but if you believe that you have unquestionable evidence of a crime, I think you're honor bound to file it.
I agree that prosecutors should take action when there's evidence, clear evidence of a crime. There is no statute of limitations on homicide cases. And in the event that we have evidence that is pure and clear, we should absolutely file charges, and that's what we have done. The thing about the inquest process is that a lot of the testimony that comes forward, a lot of the materials that are presented are not admissible in a court of law. So if by chance an inquest does present additional information, we can always revisit our criminal decision making and decide whether to file charges. Again, there is no statute of limitations on murder.
Our next audience question will start with candidate Mannion. I go to high school, and one day I was robbed at gunpoint and nearly lost my life. I knew the kid back in middle school. I went to the county, and they said nothing could be done. What will you do to stop young kids committing violent acts on the street?
I am really sorry that that person had that experience. I can't imagine how scary that is. That, in our case law, is a violent felony, and we would file that case. And the first question I would ask this young person is, which police agency did you work with? I will have my prosecutors reach out to that police agency. We will ask for the investigation. We will ensure that there was follow-up, and we will ensure that the case was actually referred to us. When cases are not referred to us, we cannot file charges. So those are the things that I would do for that young person, and I would connect that young person with a victim advocate so that they can get services to begin healing and to make sure that their trauma is addressed.
Well, I hear this all too often. I had a big event a couple of months ago, and a Seattle police officer came up to me and said that he had been seriously assaulted, that they referred it to the King County Prosecutor's Office, and nothing happened. It came back with a decline, and then they resubmitted it, and there's real concern about how assaults against officers, assaults against robberies are being handled. Actually, the inclusion of robbery second degree in the RPC was in the restorative community pathways was very, very concerning. That means for somebody that is the victim of a robbery, the offender gets no case number, no judge, no transparency, no check back. And so I think robbery is not a light crime. When you commit a robbery, it's a very serious offense. It's a violent offense. And I think we need to treat it as such.
Our next audience question will start with candidate Farrell. What are you going to do about prosecuting car thefts and property crimes?
Well, my last assignment, after I spent time in the Homicide and Violent Crime Unit, I spent time probably half my time in the Domestic Violence Felony and the newly created Domestic Violence Court Unit. My last assignment was actually, ironically, the Car Theft Unit. And so I've got great expertise in regard to how to address those cases. Again, it's about teamwork. It's about making sure that you've got the resources. And really, there's a great coalition of municipalities that work really well together to make sure they have sort of a top 10 list or that high impact offender list that we were talking about to pull out those individuals from the population that are committing those crimes, because once again, it's a small number. So there just has to be intentionality about it, and making sure that there's an understanding that that's a quality of life crime that deeply affects people from a financial and well-being standpoint.
As a leader within the prosecuting attorney's office and someone who has dedicated 27 years of my career to public safety, I know how to strike partnerships. This is the type of work I'm currently doing with the Seattle City Attorney's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the mayor. It is the type of impact that we had when we took down the open-air drug market at 12th and Jackson. I know how to partner, and I would reach out across to all of the jurisdictions in King County and fight for resources. I am a budget guru, I am a budget champion, and I know how to secure resources for the prosecuting attorney's office to tackle gun crime, to enhance victim services, to form a hate crimes unit, to ensure that we hold people accountable, and that we address crimes like car theft and vehicle prowls. Those are cases that we file every day, and we've been filing every day of the pandemic, and we won't stop.
Our next audience question, we'll start with candidate Mannion. What is your experience in the criminal division?
You know, I have never served in the criminal division. I have never tried a criminal case, and I will always be honest about that. And I know another leader who never tried a criminal case, and his name was Norm Mailing, and he was one of our most effective and beloved elected prosecutors for 28 years. And I have heard my opponent say that I'm not qualified to hold office because I have not tried a criminal case. I'm really curious, when he worked in the office, if he ever considered stomping into Norm's office and telling Norm that he was unfit to hold office. I am the candidate that has 27 years of experience. I am the candidate who has worked with 100% of our office, all 4 of our divisions. I am the leader that has led 600 employees and an annual budget of $80 million. I am the leader who has built a diverse and effective leadership team. I am an experienced candidate, and I am more than qualified to lead this office.
Well, that's counter to the truth. Our legendary prosecutor Norm Mailing actually famously prosecuted the prosecutor that was before, Chuck Carroll, who was the All-American football player and the prosecutor from 1949 to 1970. And he was famously, you must not have read Chris Bailey's book about the turning around of the office, when Norm Mailing was the prosecutor who handled that criminal case tried before the bench, a non-jury trial, against none other than the previous prosecutor, Chuck Carroll. So I would also say that there are just with the thousands of cases that I handled on daily cases and the hundreds of jury trials, there's so much that you pick up. There's so much that you know. Special assault, domestic violence, they're their own language. They've got their own schemes in regard to sentencings and knowing the dynamics of those. And I think it's important to have that experience.
Next question from the audience. Candidate Farrell, we'll start with you. I am a retired corrections officer. In my career, I took many hard hits from violent people. I'm now 75, and I'm very conscious that even one hit could be fatal. I also have a concealed weapons permit. If I shoot an unarmed young porch pirate who is striking me, will you charge me with murder?
Well, the use of force has to be commensurate. Again, I've actually tried many of these cases based on the claim of self-defense. The use of force must be reasonable under the reasonable standard of what a reasonable person would do. And you certainly cannot use deadly force for a property crime, and it's disproportionate. It's not right. And so I think, unfortunately, self-defense does have a seminal role in our criminal justice system, but you can't use that as a pretext to deliver deadly force.
The first thing that I would say to this corrections officer is that we take assaults against firefighters, corrections officers, and police seriously. And I would want those cases referred to the prosecuting attorney's office every single time. With regard to the use of deadly force, our self-defense laws do require that the use of force be proportionate and commensurate with the harm and the risk. In this case, it would be hard to determine without a full set of facts, but it doesn't sound like the use of deadly force would be warranted in this case. So, and I also believe that people should be able to pick up the phone, call 911, and get a response from their police officers. That's why we rely on police, and that's why I believe in adding police resources.
Our next audience question. Candidate Mannion, what types of crimes should be presented in court, and what types of crimes should go to alternative types of sentencing?
Well, I definitely believe that violent crimes, homicide, sexual assault cases, gun crimes should go to court. I do believe in the power of diversion for nonviolent juvenile cases, for some nonviolent adult cases, because we know that the resources of the prosecuting attorney's office, especially right now, need to be directed and focused on our violent crimes. We do have a backlog, and I would want all of our resources making sure that our homicide cases are adjudicated, that our violent crimes are adjudicated, and that means we have to make some tough choices, and that crimes that are not violent, someone's first brush with the law, We can send those to therapeutic alternatives, or we can send those to some type of alternative accountability. And we can do that in partnership with both law enforcement and our community.
The mayors of King County were informed of the launch of RCP, Restorative Community Pathways, 6 weeks, at least 6 weeks after it had been launched. And we actually found out almost by accident, and then when confronted during a Zoom meeting, that's when we found out. The PowerPoint that was provided to one of our officers listed dozens of these crimes, which included robbery, car theft, felony harassment, residential burglary, and it had a number of these felonies. We asked simply to remove a few of them, including robbery, assault in the third degree, felony assault, and we were met with a stone wall. We told no. And not only were we told no, in subsequent meetings, we were told that RCP would soon be extended to adults. And that's really what got me into this race, because I think that the office was just going in the complete wrong direction. So I don't think violent crimes should be eligible, or, you know, if you're in somebody's living room in a residential burglary, or threatened to kill somebody, or brought a gun to school, you need a case number and a judge.
Our next audience question. In the wake of the Dobbs case, we have seen state governments limit the choice of people who become pregnant, criminalizing abortion. Why are you the best candidate to protect access to vital reproductive health care? First you, and then.
All right. Well, I believe strongly in a woman's right to choose. I think it's an equity issue. And we're talking about discretion once again. I do not believe that the power of the state and the power of the prosecutor should ever be used in the most deeply personal situation and life and health choice that individual needs to make. And so I think that's where you need discernment and the use of discretion.
As a woman, as a mother, and as a leader, I believe that everyone should have access to reproductive care and contraceptives and abortion. I have made it very clear that I will not use my prosecutorial discretion to prosecute anyone seeking an abortion in Washington state. Currently, there are no laws banning abortions in our state, but we can't take that for granted. And I will work with leaders like the Attorney General and our governor, not only to protect access to abortion, but to extend that safety to others coming to Washington who are seeking refuge and care. I will not cooperate with others who are seeking to prosecute folks from out of state coming here for reproductive care. After I made my clear stance, I heard from 2 male donors, one who told me he was pulling his support, and another who said he had concerns. When I decided to run for office, I made a promise that I would not abandon my values, that I would not say or do anything just to win a vote. I would rather lose a vote than abandon my values. I will not prosecute women seeking, or any individual seeking an abortion.
Our next question from the audience, we'll start with candidate Mannion. Do you consider yourself a progressive prosecutor, and what does that mean to you?
You know, it's interesting. Both my opponent and I were asked this at the MLK Labor Council debate, and we both said yes. And it means that what progressive prosecutor means definitely means different things to different people. To me, a progressive prosecutor is someone who is working to build a fair and transparent justice system that is willing to dismantle the racial disparities, working alongside of community. It also means that we are protecting public safety and that we are doing that together. I would say that progressive prosecutors are not people who are trying to turn back the reforms, bring back the war on drugs, and solve every problem with the jail cell. That is not a progressive prosecutor.
I agree with all of that. You know, I do consider myself will consider myself a progressive prosecutor. I consider myself a progressive mayor on all kinds of issues, not only with regard to police accountability and the environment, and I'm very proud of the record that I have as the mayor of the city of Federal Way, and also my record as a prosecutor. And so actually I agree with that definition. And certainly, you know, I think that the reforms that were necessary with regard to drug laws, I think that's one of the things that Norm did. He went back down there because the Sentencing Reform Act was really disproportionate. I mean, it was, you know, for the level 8 for a delivery for a very small amount, and he went back down there and got it fixed. So I don't think that we want wide-scale legalization. I don't think that's in the best interest of anybody, but I certainly believe that we want people that can lead with compassion and common sense and make sure that when laws need to be adjusted, that they are. And so, and we need people that can change with the times and make sure that we understand that it's not just about incarceration.
I believe we are getting toward the end. We have just a few more questions for you, though. So Candidate Farrell will start on this question. This is a question submitted by the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. As King County prosecutor, how will you handle a fatal use of force incident involving local police?
Well, you know, luckily since Initiative 940, we've actually had, you know, I think the rules of that, I think, have been very, very well thought out, well followed by the cities. I think it's in regard to making sure that you've got other agencies that take the lead, not the city. I think you need the independence of another agency to review those things, those you know, horrible instances, and make sure that you look at the best objective facts possible. Relationships don't enter into that. The evidence does. And I have filed, you know, I don't even know how many cases I have filed over my time in the various units, and some of those homicide cases, and they have to be tried based on evidence. But the investigations cannot be tainted by any relationships or anything like that. So I think that you've got to make sure that there's the independence and making sure that the process in place is absolutely right.
Candidate Mann.
I believe in the supports that were brought about by Initiative I-940, and that is why I secured resources and formed a public integrity unit. This unit is dedicated to reviewing police use of force and officer-involved shooting cases. This work is also why I have intentionally declined to seek the endorsement of any police guilds, because I believe that that review would not appear fair or transparent if I am endorsed by a bunch of police unions. I also believe in the power of an independent investigation, that the facts brought forward should be reviewed and be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And when there is clear evidence of harm, of a homicide, then we will file those charges, and we have done so. We have a history in this.
Okay. The next question is, we'll start with Candidate Mannion. The jurisdictional elephant in King County is the city of Seattle, with a consequent impact on the criminal justice system. To what extent has the loss of personnel by the Seattle Police Department impacted the ability of the prosecutor's office to carry out its responsibilities, and what can the prosecutor's office do to impact the situation?
The loss of Seattle Police Departments, our Seattle police officers, has definitely had an impact on our ability to do our job. When we had our sexual assault officers removed from special assault and investigating sexual assault, the referrals to our office dropped by 50%. I know that there aren't 50% fewer sexual assault cases going on in our community. One thing that we can do is what I have been doing. I've been reaching across the street and partnering and ensuring that we are focusing our resources together on the same things. There is a reason that we worked together and took down the open-air drug market at 12th and Jackson. That was the work of the mayor, the city attorney's office, the U.S. attorney, federal law enforcement, and the Seattle Police Department working together on a common goal. And we have been doing that ever since the new administration, and that is why violent crime is down 30% and property crime is down 20% in downtown Seattle and the surrounding core.
Well, I do think, I was just actually at a briefing in which an assistant police chief of the Seattle Police Department was briefing some folks in a neighborhood in Seattle in their Chamber of Commerce. And there was significant concern and alarm in regard to just the inability for the Seattle Police Department to respond to burglaries and identity theft and you know, repeat offenses. And so I think that, you know, people are getting incredibly frustrated in this region about the inability for law enforcement to respond. And I think the King County, frankly, there's been a great deal of concern where the mayors and the police departments have been a tremendous concern with the King County Prosecutor's Office in regarding the filing and disposition standards. That's why we had started meetings 3 years ago in 2019 before the pandemic to address these. And what we got was pushback and statistics and a lack of coordination. And it was very concerning with regard to the direction that de-prosecution has occurred over the past several years.
All right, I have one more question here, written here, and I'm double checking with Ms. Taylor to make sure there may or may not be a couple more from the audience here, but I'll go ahead and pose this question. We'll start with you, Candidate Farrell. The state legislature enacted several changes in recent years related to law enforcement practices. These changes were strongly opposed by local law enforcement bargaining units and some sheriffs and chiefs of police. Were these changes, as they currently exist, reasonable and appropriate? If so, are additional changes called for? And if not, should some existing changes be repealed?
Yeah, it's truly unfortunate. I think I've taken and accepted and honored to do so the endorsements of Seattle, King County, Bellevue, Federal Way, Des Moines, and Kent, and I can do so in a manner in which my objectivity will not be affected. But I can tell you they were alarmed with the outlier that Washington State is now. It needs to be fixed, and we need a King County prosecutor to go down to Olympia and explain. Car theft just in the past year has gone up 88% statewide, and that's because people know all they have to do is hit the accelerator and police cannot pursue them. It's just wrong, and it went too far. It needs to be fixed, and we need leadership to be able to do it. That's why the police guilds endorse me overwhelmingly.
I think we have to respect the values of our community and the values that are reflected in the lawmakers that they elect. The public has decided that it is unsafe for police officers to pursue in certain crimes, not all crimes, just certain crimes. And I think that we have to respect the fact that that is coming from our community. They value public safety just like we do. They live in the communities just like we do. They are the victims of car theft just like we are. And if they say that it is unsafe for an officer to engage in a high-speed chase to catch a car thief, then we have to believe them. What we can do as prosecutors is work with police to understand so that they know what their authority is, so that they know that we will file cases when they are referred to us, and we can work with them to help guide their investigation to get the evidence they need to ensure that those individuals are held accountable.
I believe that is the questions. Ms. Taylor, do we have any more questions from the audience? Nope. All right, thank you very much. All right, at this time, I'm going to then, it's time for the candidates to give their closing statements. Each of them may take 30 seconds to provide us with a closing statement. We'll start with candidate Mannion.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, and thank you for all of our listeners and for writing in your questions. The residents of King County deserve a prosecutor that reflects their values. A prosecutor who can keep communities safe and supported by identifying common ground and building strong and collaborative coalitions. A prosecutor who isn't afraid to challenge the inequities of our current system and who actively works to build a fair and transparent justice system that protects public safety. There is a reason I have earned 160 endorsements from organizations and leaders in our region.
And thank you once again. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, League of Women Voters, and Your Honor. This has been a very informative and important discussion to have. The public safety, the ability to be safe in your home and in your community is the #1 job of government. And we need to make sure that we have a King County prosecutor to lead by example to make sure that we're doing exactly that. And I've got the relationships and the endorsements by dozens and dozens of elected officials, hundreds of individuals, labor, to make sure that we can move forward and keep our community safe. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much to each of our candidates for joining us this evening. It was my pleasure to moderate this event. And so at this point, I'm going to turn the floor back over to, I believe, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you.
Sneaking up behind here. I just wanted to thank everybody for their participation, your attendance, and also remind folks that the League of Women Voters is dependent on contributions, and so we can continue to provide events and support events like this. So please think about that, and you can go on to the League of Women Voters website to contribute or to become a member too. Always looking for new members. And I want to thank the candidates for doing such a fabulous job and answering your questions in 1 minute. That was fantastic. I'm quite impressed. Okay, thank you.